found my parents' secret will without my name right after I gave them a new car. So I took this. My name is Amanda Cerny. I'm 32 years old, based in San Diego, California, where I co-founded a boutique design studio that specializes in immersive, high-emotion spaces for hospitality brands. If you've ever stayed in a hotel that felt so calming you didn't want to leave, chances are, someone like me designed it. My job is to shape the invisible, how sunlight enters a space at 4 p.m., how the scent in the entryway matches the soundscape playing above the lobby, how it all makes you feel like you belong, even when you don't know why. That's what I build. Places that feel better than home. Which is ironic, because my own home never felt that way. I grew up in a well-pressed suburban house, 30 minutes outside San Diego, in a family where everything looked perfect, but nothing was safe to feel. My mother Angela was an etiquette coach before she stopped working to raise us. My father Darren is a retired tax advisor who still reads the Wall Street Journal like it's a sacred text. My younger sister Clara, she followed the script. College at Pepperdine, married a software engineer named Victor, and started posting meal preps and Montessori hacks like she was born for it. I didn't follow that script. I dropped out of grad school after one semester, used my tuition refund to buy a second-hand design laptop, and started working in a tiny co-working space off Fifth Avenue, where I built pitch decks and mood boards for clients who paid in thank you notes. My parents didn't say much at the time, but the message was clear. Clara was the daughter who made them proud. I was the cautionary tale. Still, I pushed through. I built a niche for myself, working on sensory design for independent spas and small boutique hotels. After 3 years, I'd landed a client in the desert who gave me my first six-figure project. And from there, things snowballed. I wasn't famous, but I had money coming in. And more importantly, I had autonomy. After years of being spoken down to over holiday meals and smiled at like a stray dog who found her way into the wrong room, I finally felt like I'd carved out something that was mine. Around the time I turned 30, Clara and Victor's finances took a hit. His startup folded, and her influencer deals dried up once the pandemic passed. They moved back in with my parents, who by then were dealing with deferred house repairs, rising medical bills, and a fridge that leaked more water than it kept cold. Quietly, I stepped in. I started paying the utility bills. I replaced the fridge. I even wired Clara and Victor enough to stay afloat each month without making a scene about it. I didn't do it for gratitude. I just thought maybe this was what grown children do, help when they can. It felt adult. It felt right. That summer, I had a breakthrough. Our studio signed a 5-year contract with a luxury resort brand looking to expand across the West Coast. It was the kind of deal that gave me real breathing room. Not just to survive, but to live. To mark the moment, I decided to do something big for my parents. Their minivan was falling apart, and I knew they'd never buy something nice for themselves. So I bought them a brand new SUV. Nothing outrageous, but solid, safe, and beautiful. I made it a surprise. I even planned a family barbecue to unveil it, complete with a little red bow and a custom plate that read, Cerny 35, to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary. That night felt like a movie. Dad hugged me longer than he ever had. Mom got misty-eyed when she sat in the driver's seat and smelled the new leather. Clara said nothing, but she didn't need to. I felt like I had finally done something that made them see me, not as the odd one out, but as someone who mattered. We took family photos in the driveway. Everyone was smiling. For a few hours, it felt like we were whole. 2 weeks later, I stopped by their house while they were out running errands in the new car. The kitchen smelled like baked apples, the kind Mom always used to make in the fall. I wandered into Dad's home office, the room where he used to lecture me about making realistic life choices. He'd left a stack of documents on the desk, some half-organized, most still in their envelopes. I wasn't snooping. I just figured I'd tidy up while waiting. That's when I found it. A creased manila envelope, unopened, labeled in thick ink, revised will, Patel Law. Inside, there it was, their updated will, signed just days after the barbecue. The legal language blurred for a moment, but one sentence stood out like a siren. All assets, property, and holdings to be transferred in entirety to Clara Cerny upon both parties passing. My name didn't appear on Se, not even as a backup. At first, I didn't believe what I was reading. I scanned the page again, hoping I had missed something. Maybe a clause buried somewhere that included me. A secondary provision. Even a line, mentioning the car I had just given them. Nothing. It was as if I had never existed. The signature date confirmed it barely 12 days after the anniversary party. Just days after Mom kissed me on the cheek and whispered she was proud of me. I remember standing in that office, the envelope in one hand, my other hand gripping the back of the old leather chair, like I needed to anchor myself to something real. There was no anger yet. No. Sharpness. Just a kind of hollow recognition. Not surprise. Not pain. Just clarity. This was who they had always been. And I, once again, I had been too eager to believe things were different. The front door opened while I was still standing there. I heard bags rustling. My mother laughing about something in the parking lot. Dad's voice followed. Cheerful. Casual. Like nothing had shifted. When they saw me in the living room holding that envelope, their expressions changed in an instant. Mom's eyes flicked to the document, then to my face. While Dad stopped mid-step, the grocery bags hit the floor before either of them said a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the paper or accuse anyone. I just held it up slightly and asked, "Would one of you like to explain this?" Mom was the first to speak, though it took a moment for her usual composure to return. "We were going to tell you," she said, her voice thinner than usual. Eventually, I looked at Dad, hoping for something honest, even if it hurt. Instead, he stepped forward with that calm, condescending tone he always used when trying to de-escalate things he didn't want to own. "Amanda, this isn't what you think," he said. "You're already successful. You have your own life. Clara, she needs this more than you do." I stood perfectly still. The words didn't sting because of the money. I had more than enough. They stung because I realized this had never been about logic. It wasn't about resources or estate planning. It was about value, and where I stood in their story. Mom's face hardened the moment she sensed I wasn't going to let it go quietly. "How dare you snoop through your father's private documents?" she snapped. "That's a complete violation of our trust." Her voice hit that familiar pitch I hadn't heard since my teenage years. When she used to scold me for being too dramatic, too sensitive, too much. I almost laughed. And in fact, something did come out. A sound between disbelief and bitter amusement. "Private," I said. "In the house I've been paying to maintain for the past 2 years, the utilities I cover, the fridge I replaced." Dad looked away. Mom didn't flinch. "We don't have to justify our decisions to you," she said. "Arms crossed now. We're your parents. We'll do what we think is best." I placed the envelope gently on the coffee table. "Then keep it," I said, calmly. "Keep all of it." I turned and walked out, not in anger, but with the quiet conviction of someone who has nothing left to lose from leaving. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in the car. I just drove home, windows down, letting the early evening breeze take whatever illusion had been left. That night, my phone rang just after 10. I let it ring out the first time. On the second call, I picked up. It was Clara. Her voice came through sharp and furious before I could say a word. "How dare you try to steal my inheritance?" she shouted. "You already have everything. Why do you need their help too?" I took a breath, careful not to rise to her volume. "I don't want their house," I said. "I don't want anything." "Liard," she hissed. "You've always been jealous of me. Admit it. You can't stand that they chose me. There was a beat of silence. The kind that would have cracked something in me 5 years ago. But not now. Clara, I said, as gently as I could manage. I'm literally paying your rent. Her laugh came quick and defensive. Like a slap. Here we go. Amanda and her precious money. Always waving it in everyone's face. That's all you care about. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I ended the call mid-rant and tossed the phone onto the couch. The apartment felt especially quiet. Like the space itself had been holding its breath. I stood by the window, watching the city blink below, and let the silence wrap around me. Whatever came next. I already knew I was done performing for people who didn't want to see me. They wanted a bank account with a face, and now the balance was zero. The following day, I woke up earlier than usual. My phone was silent for the first time in weeks. No updates from clients. No polite reminders from my accountant. And more importantly, no messages from anyone in my family. The silence wasn't just digital. It echoed inside me. Somewhere between the ribs. Where habit used to live. I didn't reach out. I didn't explain. I got dressed, walked to the studio, and buried myself in work. The kind of deep, focused work you can only do when something inside you has snapped in half and you're still pretending everything's fine. My team noticed. Of course. They always do. But no one said anything. Which I appreciated. There's something sacred about spaces where people trust you enough to let you be quietly broken. That week, we finalized 3 new resort concepts, including one with a rooftop glass cube spa that would open to the stars. I designed the light choreography myself, spending hours adjusting the rhythm to mimic ocean breathing. It helped, oddly enough, designing silence that made people feel held. When I felt dropped, the irony didn't escape me. It never did. By Friday afternoon, I was in a better rhythm. Not happy, not healed, but functional. Then the text came. It was from Mom. 1 sentence. No, punctuation. We need to have a serious family dinner tomorrow night. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I did. When my family used the word serious, it was never about feelings. It was about control. I said yes. Not because I owed them anything, but because I needed to see their eyes when I told them I was done. The house looked the same as always when I arrived. Same hedges trimmed to perfection. Same wind chimes on the porch that played the same tired melody every breeze. But something in the air felt colder. I walked in. They were all already seated, Mom, Dad, Clara, and Victor. Like they were waiting for me to take the final empty seat in a courtroom. The food was pot roast, my favorite, which immediately set off alarms. My family never led with kindness unless there was a sting hidden behind it. No one touched the food. The air felt thick enough to cut. Dad cleared his throat. Amanda, we've come to a decision, he said. I didn't blink. I waited. Mom leaned in. Her voice, steady and rehearsed. We're transferring the house to Clara's name, she said. We've already spoken to Miss Patel. The paperwork is in motion. Before I could say anything, Clara leaned forward and added, It's just to protect the will. Legally. You understand? No hard feelings. The moment stretched. I could feel it tugging on the corners of who I used to be. The daughter who smiled through dinner while being left off the guest list. The sister who paid rent in silence. The woman who bought their SUV with no conditions, only to be handed an erasure wrapped in civility. I looked around the table and let myself really see them. Mom, calculating behind her neutral tone. Dad, uncomfortable, but complicit. Clara, smug in her faux sweetness. As if this was just a harmless technicality. Victor, pretending to be invisible. I stood up slowly. Not dramatically. Just firmly. You know what? I just realized, I said, pushing the chair back. I've been funding a lie. Nobody spoke. So I continued. I thought I was helping a family. But I've just been underwriting an illusion. One where love is measured by money, and loyalty is rewarded with secrecy. Mom's fork hit the table with a sharp click. Amanda, don't be dramatic, she said. But I was already walking away. Don't worry, I said over my shoulder. The ATM is officially closed. I walked out. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. As they called after me in different tones. Mom with guilt. Dad with caution. Clara with fury. None of it touched me. Not anymore. Back at my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I pulled up every auto payment, every scheduled transfer, and I started canceling. Clara's rent, my parents' utilities, the monthly groceries, all of it. I wrote a single email to each recipient. Clear and professional. Please be advised that effective immediately. I will no longer be covering this account. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I sent them like invoices for a silence that had finally expired. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The first 48 hours after I cut the money were uneventful. No one texted. No one called. I thought maybe they understood, or at the very least, that they knew better than to push back so soon. But on day 3, the silence broke. First, it was a text from Dad. Passive as ever. About how it might have been more graceful to talk before canceling everything. I didn't reply. Then Mom called, leaving a message that started with, "We just want to understand what's going on," and ended with something about hurting the family with rash decisions. I still said nothing. The one that finally made me put my phone on silent came from Clara. A string of voice notes, each more chaotic than the last. First, she asked where the rent transfer went. Then she accused me of being manipulative. By the end, she was shouting that I was selfish and vindictive and trying to sabotage her life just because I couldn't handle being unloved. It was a strange kind of poetry, watching someone rage from a place they used to live rent-free. I didn't block them right away. I just let the messages pile up like junk mail I never planned to open. Instead, I worked. I poured myself into my studio, expanding the brand, onboarding 2 new clients, and hiring a design director who'd been on my radar for over a year. With the financial weight of my family lifted, I could breathe deeper. I could dream bigger. It was like reclaiming real estate in my own mind. I finally booked the trip I'd been putting off for months. 3 days in Ojai. At a wellness resort I had helped design 2 years earlier, but never experienced as a guest. I packed light. 1 small suitcase. A few books. No. Laptop. I needed silence again. The kind that didn't come with strings. The resort was everything I remembered. Only softer now. The lighting. The materials. The way the wind moved through the olive trees. There was a note waiting in my room from the current director of guest experience. "Welcome home." It read in handwritten cursive. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I actually was. I spent those 3 days walking barefoot on stone paths, drinking tea without rushing, and sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic about someone else's crisis. On the last morning, I watched the sunrise over the hills and promised myself something quietly serious. From this moment on, I would stop apologizing for what I had built. And I would stop funding people who didn't want me, only what I could give. I came back to San Diego with a different kind of calm. Not revenge. Not pride. Just clarity. When I opened my phone, I found over 40 missed messages. It was exactly what I expected. A storm pretending to be concern. I deleted them all. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, my phone lit up again. It was a notification from the insurance company, linked to the SUV I had gifted my parents. The registration was still in my name, something I had overlooked at the time, but now felt strangely lucky. The premium had bounced. It triggered a review notice. For a moment, I stood there in the kitchen, olive oil still sizzling in the pan, wondering how far they'd go before asking for help again. They didn't ask. Not directly. Instead, the next day, Mom posted a status on Facebook. A familiar tactic. We're going through a rough patch. It read, but some daughters only remember you when they want to prove a point. I stared at the post for a long moment, taking in the likes, the vague comments, to the way Clara chimed in below with a passive-aggressive heart emoji. It would have hurt. Once, not anymore. This time, I took it as permission. I logged into my auto service account, called the insurer, and scheduled a repossession request for the vehicle. The operator was polite, efficient. She even apologized when confirming the pickup window. No apology needed, I said, signing the request. It's long overdue. The SUV was collected 2 mornings later. I received a text with a photo confirming retrieval. It showed the car parked half on the curb, a tow truck winched to its front, and a bright yellow sticker on the window. I stared at the image like it was a final page of a chapter I hadn't realized was still open. 10 minutes later, the explosion started. First Clara, then Mom, then Dad, who rarely texted but managed to call me a disgrace in all caps. I didn't respond. I blocked each one. Calmly, without hesitation. My phone grew quieter by the hour. Like a house being soundproofed from the inside out. I knew what they would say. That I was cold, cruel, ungrateful. That I had no heart. But here's the thing. I spent years handing them piece after piece of myself. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to believe that effort could rewrite history. It can't. Some stories don't get fixed. Some just get walked away from. 6 weeks passed. No one called anymore. Not even to pretend. For the first time in over a year, the only notifications I got came from clients, collaborators, and friends I had chosen. My life started to feel lighter. Not in a grand or cinematic way. Just quietly. I took longer walks after work. I started eating at my dining table again. Not in front of my laptop. I found myself laughing at things that had nothing to do with survival. The city felt less like a place I was trying to outrun, and more like a place I had earned. My company hit a milestone. 3 new partnerships, across 2 coasts, and I marked the moment not with a party, but with solitude. A weekend with my phone off, a candle lit, and silence. I didn't need to justify. That's the thing about peace. You don't realize how much it matters until you feel it without asking permission. Then came the rumor trail. Those little crumbs from extended relatives and professional circles. Apparently, Clara and Victor had moved out of my parents' house. They were living in a much smaller apartment now, on the edge of town, close to a train station and several payday loan centers. My parents had quietly sold off some jewelry to pay down their credit card balance. The SUV's absence had caused embarrassment in the neighborhood, and the Facebook post about entitled children had backfired. An old cousin of mine commented publicly that she thought I was the one who paid for their Hawaii trip. Someone else chimed in, asking if I had truly been left out of the will. The thread got messy, and then it got quiet again. I didn't respond to any of it. The damage was already done, just not by me. At the studio, we kept building. We launched a new series of hospitality experiences using AI-enhanced scent mapping. I was invited to speak at a national design summit in Palm Springs. My face was on a digital billboard downtown for 2 weeks as part of a local entrepreneur's showcase. I walked past it on purpose one morning, just to prove to myself that the girl they erased from the will was still real. Still rising. Still building. But growth doesn't erase grief. One night, out of nowhere, I opened the family album on my phone and scrolled through the photos from the barbecue. The day I gave them the car, everyone smiling. Dad with his hand on my shoulder. Mom holding the keys, like they were gold. Clara pretending to be busy on her phone, but watching me out of the corner of her eye. I stared at those faces like a detective studies, a crime scene after the fact, looking for the clue I missed. The truth was, I had seen it. I just wanted to believe that this time would be different. That money, generosity, and consistency would make them love me in a way they never could when I was simply myself. 3 days later, I received a certified letter. Not from them directly, but from a lawyer. Miss Patel, the same name I had seen on the will. Inside was a formal update stating that Clara was now the sole legal owner of the house. The paperwork had gone through. My parents wanted to ensure the estate remained within the bloodline. That line stung more than it should have. I read it twice. It felt like being told, again, that I was the wrong kind of daughter. The one who didn't fit the image. The one who had to earn her place over and over again. Only to find out there was never a seat saved for her to begin with. I placed the letter on my desk and went back to work. I had a deadline. A resort in Oregon was waiting on the final lighting layout for their spa corridor. I adjusted the timing so the evening glow would mimic candlelight without heat. It's strange how designing for strangers felt more like home than anything I had known growing up. That night, before bed, I updated my emergency contact from Mom to my studio manager. I changed my medical proxy. I rewrote my own will. Not to be dramatic, just to be clear. Some ties are only called blood because of the paperwork. The real ones are earned. And they stay, even when there's nothing left to gain. It's strange how quiet the world becomes when you stop waiting to be chosen by the people who raised you. There's a silence that comes with that realization. Not empty or bitter, but oddly clean, like starting a page over. In the weeks after the legal notice arrived, I stopped checking old family group threads and muted every alert tied to my last name. What came instead was a string of small but meaningful victories. My studio was shortlisted for a National Design Award. A wellness brand based in Vancouver asked me to lead a full sensory overhaul of their flagship location. I walked into my apartment one night and realized I no longer associated silence with loss. It had become space, and space was mine again. Then, one Friday evening, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said it wasn't work-related. I opened the door and saw my cousin Lena standing there, looking uncomfortable but kind. She wasn't close to our side of the family, mostly kept her distance from the drama, but had always sent a birthday card and once mailed me a book she said reminded her of me. She didn't ask to come in. She just handed me an envelope and said, "I didn't want you to find this through someone else." I thanked her, watched her leave, and closed the door. Inside was a printed invitation. Clara and Victor were renewing their vows, apparently hosting a small but elegant gathering at the vineyard near Escondido. The same one I had recommended years ago for a client's retreat. On the back of the card, in looping, silver script, was a note. "We'd love to see you there. Amanda. Family is everything." I don't remember laughing out loud, but something inside me buckled just enough to release the tension I hadn't realized I was still carrying. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just a new stage and a recycled promise. I placed the invitation on the counter and let it sit there like a misplaced thank you card to a stranger. Over the next few days, mutual acquaintances began mentioning the event. Someone asked if I'd be designing the flower layout. Another asked if I was planning to bring a +1. I smiled and kept my answers short. What I didn't say was that I had already decided. I would attend, not to reconnect or reclaim anything, but to observe, to see, clearly, without hoping anymore. The vineyard was exactly as I remembered. Polished wood, golden hills, perfect lighting timed for late afternoon sun. The guests were well-dressed and self-conscious, like people who had watched too many wedding reels and now felt obligated to perform them in real life. I walked in alone, wearing a slate gray dress and minimal makeup. No drama, no message, just presence. Clara saw me during cocktail hour. She did a double take, quickly composed herself, and crossed the room like she was the host of a charity gala. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. Voice light, but watchful. I smiled. You invited me, I replied, sipping my drink. And I never turned down free wine. She laughed. Too loud. And looked over her shoulder like she needed confirmation from the audience that she was still in control. I stayed 32 minutes. Just long enough to say hello to a few cousins, eat 2 appetizers, and watch Victor make a speech that sounded like it was generated by AI and insecurity. Before I left, I stopped by the guest book. It was the kind with blank pages instead of lines. The kind that asks for something deeper. I picked up the pen, flipped to the last page, and wrote, "Real family is the one that doesn't ask what you can give before deciding you belong." I didn't sign it. I didn't have to. I closed the book, nodded to the staff, and walked out. The drive home was quiet. No music. Just the hum of tires on highway. San Diego lights blinked in the distance, like stars you could reach if you just aimed the car high enough. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. What I felt was simple and clean. Like stone underwater. They could keep the house. They could keep the new will. The inheritance. The staged photos. The narrative. I had my own name. My own work. And now, finally, my own peace. The day after the vow renewal, I woke up feeling weightless. Not joyful or triumphant. Just clear. Like something invisible had finally been put down and left behind for good. I made coffee the way I liked it. Strong and silent. No phone in hand. I didn't check social media. I didn't open my inbox. I just stood by the window and watched the light move slowly across my apartment floor. And the kind of moment that doesn't feel like a victory, unless you know what it cost to reach it. Around noon, a message came in from one of my oldest industry contacts. Someone who'd known me since my co-working days. She invited me to join a private roundtable discussion in New York for women founders in creative industries. I said yes before I even asked about the schedule. It wasn't just because of the opportunity. It was because I had finally stopped asking myself who might disapprove. The trip was short, 2 nights. But it marked a shift. The room was full of women who didn't need to prove themselves anymore. No one bragged. No one performed. They talked about things that mattered. Like burnout, ownership, and what it means to protect your voice. In a room that benefits from your silence. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it honest. I didn't mention the family drama. I simply said, sometimes you have to build a life that no one claps for until they want a seat in it. Several people nodded. One woman looked like she was holding back tears. That was enough. I flew back to California that night, feeling something close to peace, and maybe even something more dangerous pride. Back in San Diego, the studio was thriving. We signed a multi-resort contract that would cover the next 2 years of operations. I gave my team raises. No press release. No announcement. Just action. One morning, while reviewing a contract, my assistant quietly slid a small envelope onto my desk. It came through the studio mailbox, she said, and then stepped away. The handwriting was familiar. Tight. Formal. My mother's. I didn't open it right away. I left it under my notebook, finished my meetings, and only unfolded it after the office lights were off and the building had gone quiet. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. No apology. No ownership. Just a request. They were in a tight financial spot and wondered if I would consider helping out. Just this. Once. Given everything we've all shared. I stared at those words for a long time. Shared. As if shared meant chosen. As if generosity erased betrayal. As if a gift returned with silence and erasure could be asked for again. Like clockwork. I placed the letter back in the envelope and didn't respond. That wasn't silence. That was clarity. A week later, Clara texted. A picture of her son's backpack. Torn at the strap. Would you mind helping with a replacement? He starts school soon. No context. No. Hello. Just another request disguised as conversation. I stared at it and realized something that should have been obvious long ago. I was never their daughter. Not really. I had become their safety net, their fixer, their exit plan. When I had money, I was useful. When I set a boundary, I was dangerous. That was never going to change. And suddenly, I didn't want it to. That Friday night, I ordered dinner for myself, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and pulled out my sketch pad. Not for work. For myself. I started sketching the outlines of a property I'd been quietly dreaming about. A hillside plot in Santa Ynez. Enough space for a low-profile home and a private creative studio. I'd visited once, years ago, on a site tour for a hospitality project. The light there was different. The silence didn't press in it, opened up. As I sketched, I realized something else. All these years, I had been building beautiful spaces for others. This time, I wanted to build one that no one else could take credit for. No hidden paperwork. No conditions. Just mine. I named the project quietly in my head that night. Inheritance. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I would leave behind on my own terms. The land wasn't purchased yet, but the vision was already alive. And that meant I had already started. The past had taken enough. It wouldn't take this. I didn't tell anyone about the property at first. Not even my team. Not even my closest friend, who usually hears everything before I finish forming the thought. There was something about this plan that needed to stay quiet while it was still growing. I didn't want it questioned, or praised, or repackaged as part of some comeback arc. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't recovery. It was something simpler and heavier. A way to finally build something with no one else's fingerprints on it. A few weeks later, I contacted a land agent. I trusted and arranged a private viewing of the plot. The same one I had sketched on the napkin that night. It wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough for a long window that framed the mountains. Enough for a garden I could water in silence. Enough for a studio where I could create without explaining anything to anyone. I made the offer the next morning. It was accepted in less than 3 hours. I signed the contract while sitting alone in my apartment, wearing the same sweatshirt I had worn the night I found the will. There was something satisfying about that detail, a quiet symmetry. Once the paperwork was done, I called my accountant and told her to set up a trust. The land, the structure, the assets tied to it, none of it would be co-owned. No shared names. No loopholes. Just mine. A few days later, a construction manager I had worked with on several hotel projects agreed to take the job. I didn't give her the full story. Just the layout, the specs, and a timeline that I wanted to start before spring. She looked at the drawings and said, "This feels like something personal." I just nodded. It was. While that project unfolded behind the scenes, my life continued, like nothing had shifted, but inside, everything had. I stopped looking for my family in places where they had never truly shown up. I stopped rehearsing imaginary conversations where I finally said the right thing, and they finally understood. The need to explain dissolved. So, did the desire to hear them say they were sorry. I no longer wanted an apology. I wanted air. And that's exactly what I had. Then one night, I saw Clara's name light up on my phone again. I let it ring. I let it go silent. Then it rang again. A third time. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text came through. "Please call. It's about Mom." I stood there holding the phone in one hand, unsure whether to brace or breathe. I didn't call. I waited. 15 minutes passed. Then she sent another text. "She's in the hospital. Chest pains. They think it's cardiac related." I read it 3 times before placing the phone face down on the table. The thing about history is that it doesn't disappear just because you find peace. It lingers in your ribs. Your reflexes. Your hesitation to reply to messages that sound like emergencies, but might just be invitations to forget. I got in the car anyway. Not because they deserved it. Because I needed to know that if something serious happened, I had shown up, not out of obligation, but out of clarity. The drive to the hospital was quiet. I parked in the visitor lot and walked through the automatic doors without feeling like a child or a traitor. When I found the room, Clara was already inside. Pacing. Victor was seated. Head down. Mom was lying in the bed. Eyes closed. Her color looked better than I expected. Clara turned when she saw me. She didn't smile. She didn't glare. She just looked relieved. "She's stable," she said softly. "They're running more tests." But it wasn't a full heart attack. Just a warning. I nodded. We stood in silence for a moment, side by side. Then Mom opened her eyes. Her gaze flicked to me immediately. "You came," she said. Her voice was small, not fragile, just surprised. "I did," I replied. That was all. She didn't cry. She didn't reach for my hand. We just looked at each other like two people who had once shared something important but lost the language to talk about it. After 10 minutes, I left. No promises, no breakdowns, just a presence and then an exit. Back in the car, I sat with the engine running, hands on the wheel. I'm not ready to move yet. I realized I didn't feel manipulated. I didn't feel guilty. I felt done. And sometimes, being done is not a failure. It's a form of freedom. The hospital visit didn't reopen anything. If anything, it confirmed how much ground I had covered since the last time I let their chaos consume me. I didn't tell anyone I went. I didn't answer Clara's follow-up texts. I just returned to work, to routine, to the version of life that I had shaped deliberately and cleanly. The land deal closed the next week. I drove out to the property alone, with no music playing, just the sound of my tires on loose gravel and the wind brushing tall grass along the hillside. When I stepped out, the late afternoon sun had already dipped below the olive trees, casting long shadows across the dirt path. I stood there a while. No camera, no timeline, no audience, just me, and the land and the future quietly waiting. Construction began in phases. My project manager sent weekly updates, but I made a point to be involved only when necessary. I wasn't building a monument. I was building silence. A place where I wouldn't be asked to earn my belonging every time I opened the door. One weekend, I drove up again and watched the foundation being poured. It looked almost underwhelming at first. Just dirt, frames, concrete. But I knew what it would become. I had held it in my mind for years before I ever spoke it out loud. That's the thing with ideas. If you carry them long enough, they stop needing permission. Meanwhile, back in San Diego, the studio was entering its most expansive season. We launched a new client initiative, mentoring young women entering the design space. The feedback was overwhelming, not because of the scale, but because of the impact. A college student from Portland wrote to say that our sensory series had convinced her not to drop out. A mid-career architect from Denver said she was finally designing from her own voice again, not just from the firm's template. I read every word. Then I closed my laptop and walked out into the city, with nothing in my hand but a set of keys and no destination in mind. Clara showed up 2 weeks later, unannounced. I was at the studio late, reviewing finishes for a spa project in Aspen. My assistant knocked softly, then opened the door halfway. "There's someone here to see you," she said carefully. I looked up and saw Clara standing behind her, shoulders tight, makeup faded, eyes holding something between apology and pride. I nodded for her to come in. My assistant left. The door clicked shut. Clara sat across from me in the guest chair and didn't speak for a long time. I didn't rush her. Eventually, she looked at me and said, "I didn't know what they were doing with the will." Not at first. I didn't respond. She continued, "They told me I'd understand one day, that it wasn't personal, that you didn't need it." I studied her face. It was less smug than I remembered, more worn, not from age, but from pressure. Maybe from having to hold a life built on a lie and keep it standing. She reached into her bag and handed me a folded paper. "They want to revise it again. she said. Split things evenly this time. They want you to be included. I didn't touch the paper. I just looked at her and asked, "Why now?" She shrugged. Then gave the kind of half-laugh people give when the truth isn't elegant. Because you're the only one who never needed them. And somehow they need you more than ever. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I just said what had lived in my chest for too long. They can keep it. All of it. I don't want to be in the will. I just wanted not to be erased. She looked down, nodded once, and placed the paper on the table anyway. In case you change your mind, she said, before standing up and leaving without a goodbye. I didn't change my mind. That night, I walked home without the paper. I left it in the studio, under a file that wasn't urgent. It felt like putting the final thread back on the shelf. Not because I was proving a point, but because it no longer held weight. Some things are better left unclaimed. Spring arrived quietly. The hills outside Santa Ynez turned a shade greener than I remembered. Soft, but steady. Like the land had decided to welcome something back without asking what it had lost. The house was almost finished. Just a few final touches left: interior lighting calibration, hardware installation, and a last round of scent mapping in the studio room. I drove up that Friday with a thermos of coffee and no music playing, just the windows cracked and the wind folding through. When I stepped onto the newly poured patio, everything slowed. There were no pictures on the walls yet, no furniture arranged, but the space was already full. Not of people, not of memories, but of intention. I walked the whole layout barefoot, from the kitchen to the private workspace, letting the floor carry my steps without hesitation. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I was visiting something I had to perform inside of. I wasn't adjusting my voice, my tone, my posture. I was just present. That was the gift. Not the house, the stillness. That evening, I stood at the western window and watched the light land on the hillside like a slow tide. In the distance, I could see where the road curved back toward the highway, toward San Diego, toward a life I had once tried so hard to be included in. I didn't miss it. What I missed, if anything, was the idea that it could have been different. That effort and loyalty would somehow rewrite people's nature, but even that grief had faded. Not vanished, but softened, like bruises that no longer need explanation. I picked up my phone, took a single photo of the view, and then set it down. Not to post, just to keep. Not every milestone has to be witnessed to be real. 2 weeks later, I held a small opening dinner. Just 10 people, colleagues, mentors, friends I trusted. No family. No photographers. Just long conversations, slow food, and the kind of laughter that doesn't require context. One of my guests, a landscape architect from Monterey, pulled me aside afterward. She had walked every room, studied every curve, every finish. "This place," she said, "I feels like someone finally took their power back." I didn't respond. I just smiled. Because some truths don't need to be said out loud to be heard. After they left, I stayed up late. Not from anxiety, but from the kind of energy that comes when you realize you no longer owe anyone your survival story. I walked the property line with a glass of water and let the moonlight do its quiet work. I thought about the house I had grown up in the long dining table, where my name was always spoken last, and the guest room I used to sleep in when I visited after my first big project. I thought about the SUV I had given away, the dinners I paid for, the years I poured into being seen by people who only knew how to receive, not reciprocate. And then I thought about the will, the one that left me out, the one they tried to revise when it was already too late. I thought about the envelope I never signed, the invitation I never answered, and I realized something I hadn't been able to articulate until now. I didn't lose anything. I just finally stopped donating parts of myself to people who treated me like a resource. My worth had never been in what I gave them, It had always been in what I built when they weren't watching. The next morning, I sat at my desk and began outlining the foundation for something new. A residency program, designed for creatives who had been erased or overlooked. No application fee, no press requirement, just space, guidance, and the kind of safety that had taken me over a decade to build for myself. I named it after a word my mother used to call too heavy for polite conversation closure. Not because it meant the end, but because it meant choosing your own ending. It's been almost a year now. The house is complete. The studio is full. The work is better than it's ever been. My name, once used as a footnote in other people's stories, now quietly anchors spaces that help others reclaim their own. Sometimes I drive past my parents' neighborhood without stopping. Sometimes I don't think of them at all. And sometimes I do. Not with anger. Not even with sadness. Just with distance. Like a country I once visited, but no longer feel the need to return to this. People ask if I regret walking away. If it ever felt like too much to lose? I tell them this. Real loss is staying in rooms where your presence is only welcomed when it's convenient. Real healing is walking out without slamming the door. And knowing you never have to knock again. And you. Have you ever discovered what someone really thought of you only after you gave them everything?